as I was saying before the camera stopped working, cleaning this plastic lens here over the meter window is another hard thing to do because the surface is underneath the top cover there. If there's any grease or anything in there, any major contaminants, you can clean the piece of plastic that you see in front of you, but it'll just ooze back out from under the edges at a later date if there's any major problem there. That's looking quite good now. I'll clean the viewfinder glass here. Now my camera just stopped on recording on me before. I'm not sure at what point it stopped recording, so I don't know what I've lost, if anything. Probably nothing particularly significant because I'm only cleaning the top cover. It's not a particularly exciting part of the job. This shoe, which is certainly a ring in because it didn't begin its life on this camera, just clean that. When there's a new accessory, a different accessory shoe on the camera than began with the camera, then there's various reasons why that might be. These screws are really dirty. The shoe was not. That suggests that these are probably original screws, or they've come from yet another source. They didn't begin their life with that shoe. And these screws are a little bit rough. Someone's taken those off with the wrong size screwdriver. If you've got a fairly broad head on a screw and you put a narrow screwdriver bit in there and you twist it, you will end up with scars in the screws just like these. They've been scarred up, coming and going, scarred undoing them, scarred doing them back up. Your screwdriver should be the width of the screw head or very slightly less than the width of the screw head in the case of countersunk head screws. That's looking good. My pieces of glass, they're disgusting. So I'll clean these here on this piece of paper with some glass cleaner to get rid of all the bulk filth off them, and then I'll probably have to clean them again with a soft cotton cloth to remove any final smears before I put them in position. Now the way these are held in place in the camera is the frame holds a little point against it and a couple of points. It's not uncommon for the glass to be a bit nibbled at those points because glass does not like having sharp points pressing against it. So you can say that's a bit of a design fault. It means that glass can fracture where it's being held just in place with just a couple of small points, and has an annoying habit of doing things like you can assemble the camera, everything will be fine, no problem with the glass, all looking good. You send it across the room or across the world, and the next person to look at it, the glass is fractured. You've got a crack right across the middle of it. Very annoying. Of course, if it happens while it's still in the same room as you, it's less of a problem. You know what to blame and what to absolve yourself of, but when you send a camera home across the world and it's nice when it leaves and it's not good when it gets there, well, people think you've done a shoddy job. It's not good. Let's get this glass in place. I'll lift that piece here. See if I can slide this down in place. It's not enthusiastic. What I'm watching here is to make sure that that nibbled edge of glass is hidden. It can't be seen from the outside, and I can see it from the outside. I'm going to try turning that glass over. You just catch a glimpse of that nibbled edge from the top. Of course, the top of this is narrower than the bottom, so it may well be hidden at the bottom of the frame. No, I can see daylight past that. That piece of glass is no bloody good. So I have to find another one. Let's put the other one in place anyway. This one's fighting every step of the way. Well, that's a good piece of glass anyway, so we've got one good window there. I'll go away and see if I can find a replacement for the other one. Oh, well, there we go. Newly cleaned glass, not new glass, it was an old piece of glass, just as old as the camera that went in there. Came from my parts store, and I've a dwindling number of camera tops that I've running around loose. Right, well, this camera is just about ready to assemble now. My next task is to start the reassembly. While I had the camera apart, or while I was taking the camera apart, I noticed that it was missing something. It was missing the scale ring here. And the scale ring here is for our wide and tele lenses. And for some reason that's missing. Now, I don't know whether somebody removed that intentionally, whether it got damaged and was removed, whether somebody just didn't like the look of it and removed it. I don't know. I've got a replacement one here that hopefully I can get fitted. Just shaping the end of that slightly so that it tucks down neatly against the body, otherwise they can catch. And the other end of it tucks in underneath the focus knob here. If I can get that sitting down smoothly, do that screw back up. Making sure I've got the right one, because this was available in metric or imperial, and this of course is imperial, so it's important that the pieces match. Right, so that's good. That's that little task out of the way. I can start assembling some of these components. These parts were all cleaned. As it happens, they were all cleaned before the weekend, and now I'm coming back to it. Let's make sure I've got all the screws lined up ready to go, and the springs are here. Bring some bits down where you can see them. It's the return spring for that piece here, and the two springs for the buttons. Start with this. This is the finger that presses on the shutter release arm of the shutter itself. The two shouldered screws that hold this, one's got a broader head than the other one. The broader head goes to the top of the shutter. Alright, get those in place. Lift them up. Check that that moves freely. It does, no problem at all. No hint of roughness. Any reluctance to move there usually means that there's something's bent or distorted, unless you can see some visible corrosion. I'm putting its return spring in place, making sure that's hooked down. That's good, that's fine. Getting this into the housing, that's the next task. Zoom me out a bit. That'll do. So, first of all, I've got to put the springs and buttons in here, so normally I give them a little wipe of synthetic grease in here where the springs and buttons fit. One of those springs was making a getaway effort, but we've got it back. The spring goes in the hole in the button, it doesn't go on the post. Get that one in position, hold it in with my finger. Get the other one assembled. Get that in position to press both of them between finger and thumb and slide the lens standard into the shroud. Push it right through. Buttons click into place. That's all good. Now I need to apply a bit of synthetic grease. This lens standard is guided by two rails, one at the top and one at the bottom. So I lubricate those with some synthetic grease. There's not much else in contact in there. That's just floating, except for those sprung-loaded buttons, which run against the case here and here, particularly here underneath that rangefinder guide track. That should be lubricated with a bit of grease or the buttons won't run back over it smoothly. And at the front edge there, usually I make sure there's some lube there. You can see where they're going to run. This is quite well worn, at the edges here, that's quite well worn. That tells me that the camera's had a lot of use, or there was a lot of dust or grit or something in there grinding that edge away. It's only aluminium, this shroud, and you know, it will abrade away given enough opportunity. That's that little piece. While I've got that there, I can put in the other component for our shutter release, this piece here. That slides in underneath and it's held in there. If I slide this back, the lens standard back inside the shroud, that'll hold that all in place. It can't fall out while I'm going to put it back in the camera. And in the camera body, we need our transfer shaft and the bracket that holds the transfer shaft, which is there. And the transfer shaft itself is hiding there. And there's a single screw holds that into the body, and it looks like that one. Right, so those parts. First I've got to inspect this transfer shaft because I've already made a note that the rack that runs on this, the shutter cocking rack, is damaged at the point it contacts this. So I'm looking at these teeth to see if there's any evidence of a problem with the teeth on this rack, this little gear, this pinion, and I don't see one, which is good. Finding one of those would be almost as much fun as finding a new shutter cocking rack. Right, that can go into the body. Lubricated it with a little wipe of synthetic grease, and the bracket that holds it in place goes in, and that's held in place with a single screw at the top. Now the screw there is like the hole in the casting is oversized. That means that you can move things around backwards and forwards, left and right. What I've discovered some time ago is that you need a fairly neat fit between this bracket and the shutter cocking rack that's sliding backwards and forwards inside there. If there's too much clearance, the rack can move across too far relative to that little pinion, and so that the pinion and the rack are only contacting over part of the width. And if they're only contacting over part of the width, all the work's been done by only part of the rack. And the result is that the rack gets chewed away quickly. So you need things held relatively firmly so that the rack and the gear are held pretty much together. Now this shutter cocking rack is very damaged. This last 4 teeth here on the bottom of the rack are very damaged. They get worse as you get to the end here, it gets worse. Now when teeth are slightly distorted, they can be trued up. That could be in return to working usefulness. But one of these teeth here, the second to last one, the whole top of it's just folded over and rolled right round. It's really chewed away. That means that unfortunately that rack is no longer fit to be reused, and I can't really make it fit to be reused. I might get it to run, but it probably only lasts about 10 minutes. I need to fit a new shutter cocking rack. Here I've got a shutter cocking rack, a new one, that actually I purchased on eBay very recently. It's a proper Kodak spare part, and as it happens, it sounds like all the ones that have been for sale in recent years are all proper Kodak spare parts. They were never remanufactured. That was just a misunderstanding. I've got to get this correctly placed now, get this so that it's not too tight. I don't want any undue friction at this point. It needs to run smoothly, so I'm going to get my feeler gauges and make sure I've got an appropriate clearance at this point. Now I've found that 4/1000ths of an inch is a good clearance to have here. Less than that's likely to be a bit tight. More than that is likely to give us too much clearance. So I'm just checking that that arm is, that bracket in here is square, and check that that clearance again, that's too much. Let me slacken that off and move that back slightly. Every time you move that screw, this arm moves across, it swings across, so that it affects your clearance. So it's a bit of an act getting this just right. It's a bit like adjusting the tappets in a car. Every time you do the nut up, the flaming thing shifts and you've got to make another slight adjustment. That seems good. That moves smoothly. And normally I put a little drop of lacquer on that screw at this point to ensure that it doesn't shift. I do not want that moving, if at all possible. So I'll just take a little drop of lacquer. I'll apply this with a tip of a toothpick. And all I want to do is just lock that screw so it doesn't shift. Right, that's in the body. With our front standard and that all assembled, I'm checking everything's in place. That can drop in. Make sure that comes through the hole in the front standard. Here we are. Now we want 4 screws to hold that in position, and unfortunately I didn't sort them out beforehand, so I'll just have to do that now. 2 of them you can instantly recognise because they'll have remains of adhesive and stuff on them. That's one of them. Now as it happens, that screw had been removed from where it should have been before I got the camera, and was loosely holding the trim plate in place. Here's the other screw from the base of the camera. Let's get them in first. Now I'm being very cautious here because these are going into little pressed in bushes, and of course if I put any down pressure on the screwdriver, the bushes will just pop out. Then I'll have to pull things apart to get the bushes seated correctly in position again. 2 screws at the top. Now these will probably be reasonably ugly ones because they're usually done up fairly tight. That one there looks like a good candidate. I should have 3 more screws shaped like this. I've got 2 of them in front of me. The third one's probably here somewhere, but I can't see it. Okay, so we've got our 4 screws in there. Now I can do them up tight. That's great. Now at the base of the camera, I've got this. This is the bush from the base of the film cassette well. That's been pushed up, hasn't it? I'll just go away and give that a little nudge with a punch to flatten that back where it should have been. We'll pop that in place.